Thank you so much for the introduction, Joan. And Jenny and I are both delighted to be here to run this session. You've mentioned a bit about both of us already. We've both actually, where we first met, was that we were both involved with developing and presenting courses around wellbeing for CABA, which is the Institute's wellbeing charity for all its members. And so that's why we have a particular interest in the topics we're going to be talking about this afternoon. And at the last CDAF workshop, Jenny and I were exchanging messages in the chat function about, do you think we ought to offer to do something for the next one? So we did afterwards, and here we are today. Jenny, do you want to say anything before I go on to the next slide?
Yeah, absolutely. So Hilary and I, having run wellbeing courses and seeing that sometimes just thinking about things in a slightly different way or asking a certain question can make, you can see the transformation, how it makes someone feel so different about issues and things that they're facing. So we've put this together with 3 areas that we think people are facing at the moment in particular. And we've thrown our best ideas at it, and I'm going to say lots of different ways of saying same thing maybe, but hopefully something will stick and something will resonate with you. And it would be really good if you can switch your cameras on. And I know I've had mine off because I've had my little boy running around who through lockdown has started to really enjoy being on Zoom and the attention that he gets. So it's very distracting, but they're all locked out now, so we're all okay. But if you can switch your video on, that would be really useful. And if we say anything that resonates with you, that would be really useful to put it in the chat box that makes sense to you. Or if there's anything that someone said to you about resilience or about how to smooth over those difficult conversations, anything you can share in the chat box might really help somebody else. So please, as much as you can in the chat box as we go through this. We don't like to talk at you, we want to share some things with you, but the main magic happens here in the conversations, which you'll do in breakout rooms or in the conversations on the chat. So please do get involved.
Thank you. So if you can just move on to the next slide for me, Jenny. So this is our agenda for this afternoon. These are the 3 topics that we're going to talk about, but we're just going to introduce them to you, and then you're going to have opportunities in breakout rooms to talk about them. The whole idea today is to help you interact with some worksheets that Jenny has put together, done a fantastic job putting together, but in particular to give you resources that you can take away and share with your teams. So we very much see this as the start of a process. And so in the chat box, there is already a link to the worksheets, and there's also a link to a Padlet that you can go to where you can put your comments up there. When you go to the link to the worksheets, you can also see the slides. So we're sharing everything as we go along, but really the next hour and a half is an opportunity for you to all engage and share some issues that you want to. So if we can just go on to the next slide, Jenny. Thank you. So I'm quite often known not as Hilary Lindsay, but as the lady with the triangles, because this is the framework that I came up with as a result of my doctoral studies. And the full model has got another 4 triangles above this and goes up to a peak, which is about cognitive learning. But today we're talking about adapting and coping. So this is very much around the bottom line of my framework, if you like, which is about the interaction between intrapersonal learning and skills and interpersonal. So you've got an opportunity here to go across from self-belief and positive attitude, which are about you yourself, to then experimenting and exploring and engaging, which is about you getting involved with other people, the interaction bit. And if we just go on to the next slide, having discovered there were 9 possible triangles, I then turned them into 9 squares. And these are the similar categories, if you like, from the framework I designed to do with a framework that helps you if you're wanting to develop as a researcher in academia. And these are just different words that came out of that different research. But what they're all saying is that these are the different sorts of attributes and attitudes that you need to be thinking about, in addition to all the knowledge and skills that you need. And if we just go on to the next slide, Jenny. Thank you. And the reason why I initially chose intrapersonal and interpersonal as the words for my framework was because emotional intelligence is always based around those two dimensions. So these are the four main aspects of emotional intelligence. First of all, the self-awareness and management, and then the relational management and the social awareness. So when Jenny and I were planning what do we talk about today, we thought, well, actually, let's pick 3 topics that go across that range, so that you can have one that's about you in particular, one that's about you trying to work with other people, and you then having a potentially difficult or not so difficult interaction with somebody else. So that's the background, if you like, the academic background to why we've ended up with these 3 topics that we're going to talk to you about today. So Jenny, can I hand over to you? You're still on mute?
Yes, absolutely. Got it. Thank you. So having had the conversation about how these build up and what the areas we thought we'd focus on, we came up with these 3 areas. And the first of this had to be building resilience. Because if you haven't got resilience, then you're not able to cope with or even think about the change or have the difficult conversations. Resilience is often thought about having more and more, being able to have more and more piled on you, and just taking it like a woman and being strong about it. But actually, resilience is being able to bounce back. So a resilient person might be somebody who has a cry, who feels upset, who feels overwhelmed, but a resilient person will be able to bounce back to their normal state relatively quickly. So rather than thinking about having things piled on you, think about how easily you can bounce back when things go wrong. Because if that's acceptable to you, then you are resilient. And if that bounce back is taking too long or difficult to do, then you need to think about how to build up your resilience. And I have put, this is Kylie Grimes, who was in the Paralympics. And I find the Paralympics so inspiring, especially from a resilience point of view. In fact, I could have put them in all the different sections, but I've just stuck to this one. And she was the first woman to win a gold medal in the wheelchair rugby. And I don't know if you've ever seen wheelchair rugby, but it is brutal. Just a few minutes clip of watching wheelchair rugby. It's amazing how they get knocked over. They get it feels quite violent, and they just jump back up again. But this sport really stuck out for me for resilience because it had its funding cut and then restored. So having that rug pulled out under your feet, I feel like they understand that. But then they've actually come back, and the pandemic's had an impact on training and been able to get together to play rugby. And a lot of the people playing have all different needs, but they've come back together and they've actually won this gold medal. So it's that bounce back ability that resilience is about. If you're not bouncing back as quick as you want to, then you need to do something to either reduce what's been put on you or to feel better, to be able to have a greater range and be able to feel better, which will help you bounce back more quickly. So what I've done is I've put 3 worksheets together, and if you click on the link, you will find the worksheets on the drive. And what I'd like you to do is, in breakout groups, I want you to look through the worksheet. So first of all, in your breakout groups, just take time to have a look through the questions that I've put on the worksheets, just for that first one, which is all about building resilience. And I'd like you to talk about how you could maybe use that resource. So maybe for yourself or to open up a conversation. If you can, of course, record your thoughts on the Padlet. And I know we're getting a lot better at that. The first time I had to talk and record the Padlet, it was really difficult. But if someone in the group could record your thoughts on the Padlet, that'd be really useful for when we sum up. And then I've realised I've got my timings out because we started a bit earlier. So I will update those. And I need you to come back into the room. Hilary, I'm going to ask you to work out the timings because I'm on the spot now for what time we need to come back for. And just as you're working out those timings, these are the questions. So if you aren't able to download the worksheet for any reason, you could just take a screenshot of this page. And this is some of the questions that I've put into that resilience workshop. So what time are we back, Hilary?
We come back at 3:30, and I think Sarah's going to put people into breakout rooms now.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to pull them back now because it takes a minute. Am I clear enough at the moment?
Yes, you are. You're fine.
Oh, God. It's horrible, that panic when I get that. You're going to get the message: internet connection unstable. Yeah. It's always a good sign when people don't come back too quickly, I think. Well, there we go. How was your group, Paul?
It was good. We decided that we were all quite resilient. I posted a photo onto Padlet. Don't know if you saw it.
Yes. I can see a picture of you with your beer, Paul.
Yeah, that's pretty resilient, isn't it?
It certainly is. So are you willing to share this more widely afterwards?
Absolutely, yeah.
I like the picture, not the beer.
Should all be back. Oh, I think everyone's back now. Is that right?
Yeah.
I've had that dreaded your internet connection is unstable sign. So if I go off, do let me know. But I hope that's a good start to your conversations. I've got some really interesting stuff on the Padlet, and that's really one point I want to make, which is the point that I put on the worksheet at the top, saying that part of being resilient is being self-compassionate. Things and I heard things on when I was talking to people here and back at the and feel like they're catching up and they're behind and they're berating themselves for not working more over summer. But if my best friend said that to me, I definitely think that's ridiculous. You need to be able to.
So Jenny, you are breaking up a bit. Do you want to stop sharing your screen and I'll share mine instead so it doesn't take away from your bandwidth?
But I want room one to just share some of the things they talked about. So there's someone from room one, you can share theirs whilst we sort this out. So room one, that's Karen and PJ and Rod, Sam and Selma and Ting.
Is that us, Jenny?
Yeah.
Oh, right. Okay. Well, we had a really good chat about why we're feeling resilient and why we're not feeling resilient. Most of our numbers, I think, were around sort of 6, 7 today. I'm looking at the Padlet and trying to find other people's. I shared a story about having a mini breakdown in the airport on Saturday, and other people were talking about the pandemic itself and how we've had to cope with lockdown and work and manage behaviour of management sort of being testing us. But we did come up with the fact that guilt is a big factor in making us feel that we're not coping, and so we've got to deal with the guilt and see other people's perspectives, which would help us to deal with the issues that we're facing. Anybody else want to say anything from the group?
Feeling at the moment, and as academics we tend to be really driven and we're really self-compassion is a really important part of that. PJ, did you have something else? I saw you unmute then.
No, sorry, I was just going to add that we did put, there were some bits in there which talked about what we were doing to make sure that we were coping, which was things like taking walks and taking breaks, and someone just telling you that it's fine, whatever you're doing is fine and it's going to be okay kind of thing. But that was it.
Things for ourselves and also for the people that we're working with. because if you can be open and vulnerable about the challenges you're facing, it can really help support the people that you're working with. Okay, so we're doing this lightning fast. So the next area to talk about is change, obviously, because you're still here. I know quite a fair amount of colleagues that have not dealt with change and have left or taken retirement. So give yourself a pat on the back for that. Change is quite painful. I like the analogy of a butterfly. The idea is that to move from a caterpillar to a butterfly, sometimes it looks like nothing's happening, and it's quite painful and it's quite difficult, but then suddenly the butterfly emerges, which is an improvement and the result of it feels like they're not really happening, but being able to deal with change is really, really important. And the second worksheet that I've shared is all about thinking about the resistance that people naturally feel to tools that you can use to help people deal with change, or maybe help cope with the change yourself. So back into breakout rooms. Different people might react to it and the resistance they might feel, but then moving into how those tools can be used and how that applies to the changes you're facing. I think everyone should be just about back now. So thank you very much for your discussions on change. I always get concerned when I send people off to talk about change, because often it gets quite negative fairly quickly about how painful change is and how you often don't feel listened to. So we're just going to have a talk about the things that you've said about dealing with change. I can see the Padlet, which is working a bit better for me now, around some of the issues that we've faced and things that we've had to deal with, and some of the challenges about being remote. And I think that is really true, that you can't see some of the different slight triggers or the slight bits of body language that you'd maybe react to in a face-to-face situation. And it is a lot harder to ask for help when you're remote, because everything becomes a lot more feelings are really, really powerful when it comes to change. And that's partly because no one can argue with you if you say you feel a certain way. So they can argue that things have not changed in a bad way. But if you say, I feel frustrated about this, no one can argue with that. So it can be a very powerful statement to make. I've spoken to room 3 and asked them to give us some feedback on what they were talking about. So if room 3 could give us some ideas about dealing with change and maybe tools or the things you were speaking about around the challenges of dealing with change.
I don't mind talking for our group. So we talked about a few different things. I think we touched on the idea, first of all, of the increased workload being really difficult. And it's not just the increase in workload that we found was problematical, it's just the changing patterns of when people are working. And we talked about deal with different issues at home. So people are maybe working till later after the kids have gone to bed and what have you. And I think that change must have been very difficult for a lot of people, but perhaps because everyone's in the same boat, we're all a bit more sympathetic to each other about this, so I would hope. So that was one of the things we talked about. And we also talked about the idea that because we're not seeing people physically, you don't pick up on maybe behaviours or people being anxious. It's easier to hide, isn't it, when you're online? So people who maybe don't want to share their feelings about change and their anxieties, it's easy for them to hide away and not be noticed. So I think those are my observations. Anyone else in the group want to come in?
I think you've summarised what we were talking about. Very much, just a loss of control, I think, in terms of not being able to deal with things. Or maybe, you know, we've managed, we've got things done, but it's just not, it's a different way of dealing with things. You know, I had a member of staff, I said to the group, whose wife had a baby, and I only found out through somebody else. Whereas if I'd seen that person in the corridor, I probably would have known, you know, from, you know, fairly, you know, several months previously. So as a manager, that's the bit I found quite difficult. It's just not, I don't feel I've managed my team particularly well. We've got there, they've got through, and I've tried my best to, you know, to have, you know, meetings and all those sorts of things, but it's the not really knowing.
Yeah, absolutely. And the pain of the change is different for everyone, and it's hard. It's sometimes hard in our teams to understand who's struggling with it more. What I also think we're not very good at when dealing, but actually we have come a long way. And I'm getting signs that my internet's unstable again. So change is painful. We do need to talk about and understand how people feel and how they're dealing with it, which means we're going to have difficult conversations, which is the third and final part of our discussions today. And it's my favourite because we're going to build our resilience. If we're going to deal with change, then we need to have difficult conversations. And I think this image is really overpower you in any way, but they just feel that I am right and what I'm saying is important. On this worksheet are from the book on nonviolent communication, which is Rosenberg's book, and I would really recommend that you read that. It's an easy book to read, and it talks a lot about thinking about your own needs and other people's needs, and your ideal world is where you can meet your own needs and you can help other people meet their own needs without difficult conversation, and then preparing for it. So the questions that I've given you in this worksheet are just to help you prepare for that. So think about, how do you really feel about this conversation? What would be the best outcome for you? And how might the other person feel? What are their needs? What are they thinking about in this situation? And then to show empathy and compassionate listening. Generally, people just want to be listened to. And I think thinking about these different difficult subjects is really important. So or maybe you want to think about it in more detail, but the idea behind this worksheet is just to prepare for a difficult conversation. So we're going to go back into groups, and obviously the two that haven't fed back will be the ones feeding back today, as any good teacher will know. But if you can keep recording your thoughts on the Padlet, that'll be fantastic. And just think about this kind of how to have us, and then any thoughts you can have if you can.
Do you want to send us to breakout rooms, Paul?
Okay, will do. What time do you want people back, Hilary?
Oh.
We got
20 past.
Okay, 20 past 4.
Yes, that would be lovely.
Okay.
Please, internet.
Well done.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, fantastic.
Oh, there we go.
Thank you, Sarah.
I've resorted to my phone now, and I'm astounded how the students are adaptable enough to watch my lectures on a phone. It's quite difficult. But anyway, thank you very much for having those conversations about difficult conversations. The one that I got into was already gave me a flash of inspiration. So Rod was saying that actually there should be a question 1, which is what is this conversation about, but a 1B, which is what this conversation is really about. And I think that we need to remember that when we're having these difficult conversations, that sometimes what we're having the conversation about isn't really what we think the conversation is about, isn't really what it's about for the other person. So I know your rooms got all changed again in the chaos of going into the final breakout rooms. So I wondered if anyone has anything else to add that they can express, they talked about for having those difficult conversations. So just a few people from rooms that haven't spoken up yet.
I was just going to pipe up that Lisa made the point that when talking to students, sometimes we have to have difficult conversations with students, obviously as well as staff, etc. But perhaps for more junior members of staff and equally more senior members of staff, the lack of training in how to hold a difficult conversation, and that may be part of the reason that more senior members of staff often get them shoved our way, perhaps, is because we haven't trained our junior members of staff to do that or to tackle it. And that's something which we had quite a conversation about, is none of us like doing it, but actually we need to train people. We need to take time to show people how to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And just sharing this with them, just thinking about things in advance can really help. Brilliant. Anyone else? Sean, I've seen some interesting points from you on the Padlet about you trying to cope with students not accepting what you're telling them.
Yeah, I suppose what they're going through is the stages of grief, isn't it? When you tell them they failed and their absolute disbelief. And I think in our team, we thought maybe sometimes when you've got a really, really hard conversation, like you failed, it doesn't matter how good you think you are, you failed, that sometimes the emotion, the empathy doesn't work. You've really got to use unbiased, unemotive language just to get the message across, like doctors are trained to do, isn't it? The doctors are trained not to use emotive language when they're given bad news because it creates ambiguity. So sometimes the empathy thing maybe is questionable. I think when you're having afterwards, you can do the empathy and the softer stuff then. But I think on the initial message, sometimes you've really got to be quite blunt, unfortunately. Yeah,
just to make sure the message is getting across, because it might not. That people are seeing the conversation in different ways. Brilliant. And then one more person with a question or some thoughts they were thinking about. One more feedback, and then we'll be wrapping up for today.
I just put in the chat because I can't work out how to raise my hand, but I've leapt in because nobody else did. So I think we also thought that the prompts were good, but you not necessarily you're going to work through them in that strict order. It would just be you go in and just see how the conversation develops.
Absolutely. So we have to be quite reactive and adaptable. Otherwise it'll feel like read script. Definitely. Brilliant. Well, I think you've coped really well today for a Friday afternoon. I would never have a difficult conversation on a Friday afternoon, by the way. And you've coped really well, and hopefully you've had some good conversations throughout that around building your resilience and dealing with change and how to have difficult conversations, and you'll be able to cope with my internet challenges. And just to wrap us all up, I'm just going to pass over to Hilary to finish us off for today with the final thoughts.
Thank you, Jenny. So we were talking about rebooting, and we were talking about adapting and coping, and I think we've done all those things several times in the past hour and a half from the presentation point of view. But Jenny and I so hope that you're going away with some ideas from today that could help you reboot, even if it's just one thought that you've got from reading through the prompts. Then that's a thought you hadn't had at the start of this session. And not just about having ideas, but working out how you can turn those ideas into action. And then these worksheets are very much a resource that we want you all to use. So you can either share the resources or hold sessions, or if you're saying that your junior staff haven't yet had training in how to have difficult conversations, well, who could you get to help give them some training in doing that, so that you're helping to develop the future? So you've already accessed the worksheets, but the link to them's on the next slide. And Paul, I hope, or Sarah, I hope we'll be able to share these slides in some way with the delegates, will we? Or certainly the link, because once we've got the link, you've got access to the slides.
Yeah, I can put the link in the chat if you want, actually, Hilary, and then everyone's got access to them. Hold on.
I put it in at the beginning, didn't I? If you put it in again at the end, then people can cut and paste it, can't they? That would be good. And on the Padlet, we're wanting to keep that going. So if any of you feel you've put anything on the Padlet that you don't want to be shared more widely, or you want to change what you've said.
Should I take that photo off then?
Well, it's entirely up to you. But we wanted to share that warning with you all so that you could realise that we were talking early on, weren't we, about privacy. So we thought we ought to give you all a chance of changing what you've got up on the Padlet if you want to. So that's us over. I think Jenny and I are both really pleased that we had the idea to run this session, and we hope you found it helpful. So thank you all for your contributions this afternoon. As Jenny says, it's Friday afternoon, but I think we've had some really useful conversations about a range of challenging topics. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Hilary. Sorry, Sarah. Thank you, Jenny and Hilary, on behalf of CDAF. That was very, very useful, and I really like the way that we were able to do tasks and we were able to discuss, which, you know, is really an excellent way to get us more involved in the conversation. And I'm sure
Joan, it was applied open book learning that you were doing just now.
Applied open book learning, right? Okay, must write that down. But anyway, I mean, I'm sure that this will be something we maybe will want to come back to at some point in time, because I suspect as this year progresses, a lot of us are going to suffer from a lot of stress, particularly in terms of uncertainty, and perhaps dealing with change as you know, we maybe go in and out of many lockdowns in our own universities. Who knows what's going to happen? So thank you all again for a wonderful session, and we'll hopefully see you all again at some